what I'm looking to talk about is what the immediate challenges are facing businesses at the moment. Now, so far, 2020 has presented the biggest challenges that most businesses have ever had to face. All businesses have had to learn to be agile, have had to learn to adapt, and we've had none of the stability that we're used to, none of the certainty about how we're operating and what the economy is doing. And it's far from over yet. We now got that Richard was just saying, a lot of the government packages for support are now being withdrawn. We're going to find the real consequences of a lot of the business turned down, especially as the furlough scheme is pulled back, and the economic impact of the recession, which has been staved off largely by the furlough scheme at the moment, will start to come into effect, and we're going to have some very awkward and difficult trading months ahead of us. So again, business is going to have to learn to adapt. They're going to have to be agile. We're now looking at decisions where instead of maneuvering around lockdown, which we always looked on as being a temporary basis, we're now looking on decisions that are medium to long term as to how we're going to cope with a different economic outlook. And the big problem here is that there's very, very limited certainty at the moment. There's very limited visibility about what is actually going to happen. It's a bit like trying to navigate when a thick fog comes down and you've still got your sunglasses on. You can't see out there. You can't see what's ahead. But you know that your business needs to adapt. So how do we deal with this? Well, we've been doing a lot of work with this with clients. And the basic principle that we always come back to is don't abandon your core principles. Remember what you were doing that was good in your business before, your business planning, your business forecasting, and stay with that, because that will still hold your business true regardless of what the conditions are. So what you need to look at now is you need to revisit your business plan, because over the last few months, all businesses have changed in different ways. The cost structure has changed. The client bases have changed, and there are certain things that you know about your business that have already changed, and you need to reflect that back into your business plan and look at, adjust for what you know. And then with a lot of businesses, that'll be that their operating costs have changed. A lot of us, travel costs are well down. For some of us who are sort of short-term renting, premises costs have gone down. And all these things need to be brought in to update your business plan to make sure you're looking at your accurate cost base going forward. Then when you've done that, what you need to look at is you need to look at your key performance indicators, your KPIs, because those should still be true for you now going forward as they were before. But some of them that work in absolute terms, you may need to be adjusting them. For instance, your KPI, your sales forecast. What you had at the beginning of the year prior to the lockdown may well have changed now. But of course, what you're sitting there thinking now is, yeah, that's all very well, but I haven't got a crystal ball. I don't know what it is. Well, you got to look at something. You got to put something in to see if that, as to what that is a target to drive for. Revisit your KPIs, recalculate them, and just remember the right KPIs are always the right KPIs, especially where you have ones that are ratio or percentage based. They will still serve you, they will still allow you to monitor your business. So when you've got the basic adjustment on your business plan and your forecast, what you also need to keep in mind, and I will say this is true all the time as well, consider all the changes in your business plan and your forecast in terms of the stakeholders in your business. Now, I always identify 5 main stakeholders, and this is in no particular order. So it's the shareholders or owners, the team, the employees of the business, your customers, your suppliers, and your community. Don't rank these, but just think of the impact that the changes that you're making in your business will have on all of them, because you just need to remember that you need all of them to keep your business going and to keep it thriving. The crucial part now is when you get to this stage is give yourself the right tools that you need to make strategic decisions in your business, not the knee-jerk reactions that you often get from people, which is basically down to panic, and it's especially where people haven't got a sound business plan. They just react very quickly to what's in front of them at the time. It's not always the best decisions made, but of course, this is easier said than done. The pressure is on in terms of the changes you have to make. The wrong decision made at the wrong time can be very, very costly. And very often when faced with, for instance, decline in sales, the first thing that business owners will look at is, well, where can I cut costs? I'll look to my workforce, because that's one of the, what's often perceived as being one of the easier ways to actually to save money, to save costs. This is like a very big decision though, because you have to consider before you go into any sort of redundancy process, you have to remember that it can be quite a long process. It's an expensive process in terms, not just in terms of short-term cash, but also emotionally. It's a very difficult process to go through. If you do lose people from your team through a redundancy process, they are then gone. Once you've made somebody redundant, the chances of ever getting them back again is pretty slim. And you also have to consider that what the impact of a redundancy process is on the people that are left, what some people call survivor syndrome. That once that redundancy process has gone through, what you often find is that you will then have a number of other people who will leave anyway, because they've just been left feeling very insecure and unsure by the whole redundancy process. So be very cautious about diving into this as an immediate reaction to how you're going to save costs. What I would do to start off with the process is, the first thing I'd start looking at is sales. So what is your sales mix? What were you forecasting pre-pandemic, and what has changed during the course of the lockdown? On your sales mix, where are you making the best margins? Which of your sales lines or your services, your offerings, which are the ones that have stood the test of lockdown, are still being demanded by your customers, especially your repeat customers? And are you making sure that you're focusing your attention on those particular areas in terms of what you're delivering out to your customer base? So what you're obviously looking to do is you want the most profitable, the highest margin areas of your services or sales, and the ones that were also in demand. There's no point offering something that gives you a lovely profit margin but nobody wants. And people's needs have changed over the last few months. And some of those changes will be permanent, some of them won't. But going forward, you need to anticipate what people are going to be looking for in the coming months. What of your services and sales are going to be the things that are going to be in demand? And make sure that you're setting up your business properly to deliver those. Don't try selling something that people don't want, basically. And you might find within there that you have to change your business plan quite considerably, but you're focusing on your profit and making sure you're getting the right return for what you're doing. When you've looked at your sales mix and you've looked at your margin and you're happy that you're getting that right, you need to then go in and look at your overheads. Now, all of this review that I'm talking about here, my suggestion would be that you break it down into a 3-month period. And you don't try and look at planning and revising your business plan any more than 3 months ahead, simply because the visibility is just not there. There's going to be a lot of changes going on. You plan carefully over the next 3 months and you decide what changes you actually need to implement in that 3-month period. You should continue planning beyond that, but it's that 3 months is where your focus is. So now look into the overheads on your business, which, as I've said, these are the overheads that you've revised since lockdown, since things have changed and the shape of your business has changed. You should be categorizing your overheads into 3 types. Your variable overheads, the ones that vary directly in accordance with your sales activity, the ones that you can measure as a percentage of your sales activity. And quite often, travel is normally a good one for this, although at the moment it's possibly not, because so much more is being done remotely. But your other costs, like your overheads, like your stationery costs and your telephone costs, they will normally track activity in terms of what's happening in your sales, and you can represent them as a percentage of your sales turnover forecasting purposes. You then got your semi-variable. Now these are the overheads that do vary in line with sales, but not directly and not completely. An element of them will be fixed, an element of them will be variable. The final category, which is your fixed or your long-term expenses, the ones that you know you're not going to change in a 3-month period, or you're unlikely to change in a 3-month period. And I would actually include most of your employees in this fixed cost. Because even if you make the very hard decision that you need to go down redundancy process route, it's going to take you a few months to do it. There's a lot of consultation and so on to go through. And within that period, there's a lot to manage. And certainly premise costs, they all fit into this fixed long-term cost category. There's very, very rarely can you get out of any sort, unless you're doing a very, very short-term letting. There's very few things that you can get out over a 3-month period. Now, by categorizing your overheads in this way, what you can then do is actually start to model your business plan in terms of various outcomes dependent on the level of demand over the next 3 months. So what I'm suggesting, when we do this with clients, we model it in various different ways. A lot of them are Excel-based models or other forecasting tool models, where we look at it and we say, okay, this is the target that we've set, and this is the sales, this is the direct costs and overheads. Now, what happens if we look at this we only hit 50% of target, or 70% of target, or we actually do 120% of our target? Now, I'm just sort of plucking these figures out of the air, but this is where we sort of normally start with clients. And what we do is we put this all into one model, so you can look at it and you can say, well, at 50% of our projected sales, we know that our variable costs are going to come down broadly by 50%. The semi-variable may come down by, let's say, 25%. Our fixed are not going to change. So 50% of our sales forecast, what does that do to our forecast profit? Because obviously it's going to take that down, and then you can look at it based on the top of the revised overheads and say, so what additional savings would we need to make at 50% of that turnover to maintain our profit? And then you look into your costs in more detail and see what else that you potentially could change if you hit at that level. You're doing the same thing at 70% as well. So you're giving yourselves a range and you're giving yourselves an idea of what you need to actually action. The other thing to look at, though, that is absolutely vital, as well as looking at your profit, look at your impact on cash, because the cash is the one thing, as you know, the old saying, cash is king. Well, cash is the thing that's going to determine whether you continue or not. You should always be running a cash KPI. That one of your KPIs should always be related to cash. And what I would say is that I've seen a lot of companies that have like a cash buffer and they say we need to keep X as a cash buffer. My suggestion would be not to do that. My suggestion would be that your cash KPI should actually be in terms of your what you could call a cash runway. And that is determining how many months of your overhead costs that you want to have in cash as a buffer. So let's say you decide on 6 months. That's how much cash you want to be sitting on as your buffer. So what you're saying is at the end of that period, if no more sales came in, you would have 6 months of cash sitting there that you could use before you run out. And you set that KPI, whatever that realistically is going to be for your business. I mean, a lot of larger businesses will work on 9 months. That's a long time. A lot of smaller businesses have a much, much shorter cash runway, but you need to determine what this is and then look at what the impact of this revised business plan level would be on your cash. So take it from your profit and loss into a cash flow forecast and look at it and say, okay, so if at 50%, it tells you that whereas you were looking at a cash runway of 6 months, all of a sudden you're looking at 1.5, you know you've got some drastic things to do to restore your cash runway and keep your cash KPI running correctly, or you know that very, very quickly you're going to be in trouble. The reason I also said about looking at your target at 120% of capacity as well is you actually don't know which way things are going to go, and that's a good exercise to do the other way around, because people always think, oh, well, that's fine if I'm at 120%. Well, ask yourself the question, is it? Because your business structure has changed. Ask yourself now, realistically, that target that you originally set, your forecast for sales, have you actually got the capacity now to hit that 120% on an ongoing basis? Because if you haven't, you're making different decisions and processes within your business, and you need to look at that carefully as well. So you want to be looking across a range of outcomes when you model your business. Now, looking at this over 3 months, that gives you a detailed look. It will tell you what immediate action you need to take to maintain your profits, to maintain your cash KPI. What it does then allow you to do is extend beyond that 3-month horizon and set down markers and say, okay, let's have a look and say that if we hit target in the 3 months, are there any decisions that we're likely to have to make in the next quarter, the quarter after that? But more importantly, if we're at 50% and we can get through the first quarter, but it still remains and appears to be at 50%, what decision do we have to make at the beginning of the next quarter? So what you're doing is you're setting down markers that are decision points going forward. So instead of revisiting the decision process too regularly, you know that if it sits at 50%, what you're going to have to do at the end of that quarter, it's already in your plan as to what you're doing. And the same if you're going over your sales budget. If you are over sales budget, and this is normal planning stuff. If you are over your sales budget, when are you going to need to recruit? When are you going to need to be able to increase your capacity? When are you going to have to think about, potentially even taking on more in the way of premises? But setting down these markers so your planning is clear and laid out, and it just takes away a little bit of that uncertainty going forward, and it means you can monitor more carefully on what's happening in the economic climate, and you can implement your changes gradually over a good period of time to have a good timeline, which is something we have set out with many clients. We actually set a timeline for decisions which are based on the 3 different outcomes for what's happening with their business. Because even a lot of the larger companies that I work with at the moment, many of them are just saying they have no visibility beyond the next 3 months. They just have no idea, especially if they're involved in export, because we got the 2 big uncertainties on export. The one is what's happening in the global economy, and B, the fact of Brexit coming up, that is going to potentially cause a lot of other problems as well. So many of the larger companies I'm working with are saying we are not going to forecast beyond 3 months at the moment. That's the end range, and at the end of that 3 months, we revise again. And as I say, if you set these markers down for your decision points, you've got those there and ready, and you can act on them if you need to, if you find that you haven't been able to lift your turnover or whatever. And it does also mean that if you are faced with having to make the very, very difficult decisions that you may have to make in terms of redundancy and so on, you're doing it over a more structured period of time, and you're looking at it more carefully, and you're allowing yourself more time to approach it properly. I think one of the biggest dangers to businesses at the moment is if they haven't got a proper business plan, if they haven't got proper forecasts in place, they are making knee-jerk reaction decisions, and they're not always the best ones. And as I said earlier on, the wrong decision at the wrong time can be very, very costly. So I think it's really, the essence of what I'm saying here is good planning is always good planning. We are in a different time, and I think we've got to shorten timescales for what we're looking at the moment, just simply because the visibility is not there. But basic principles remain the same. Keep monitoring your business plan. Keep looking at those KPIs and seeing what you need to do to meet those KPIs. Always remember that one of the most vital ones was always going to be cash. Profit is great, but it's actually make sure you're turning it into cash, and you're actually getting that cash runway. And you can measure your cash runway, including your receivables, your debtors as well, but always make an allowance for the levels of bad debt when you're doing that. Because if you were assuming that you're always going to get 100% of your debtors in, that's not always the case. And be very wary at the moment about what position other businesses are in, because there could be some of your customers out there who they're struggling, they're finding it difficult, And if they can't pay you, then obviously that's going to have implications for coming back on your business. So you're going to have to be a little bit wary about your dealings with people. You're going to have to be a little bit cuter when people come in asking you for increased credit limits and so on. So basically, keep your planning, keep measuring your KPIs, and make informed decisions. Now, I'm quite happy to take any questions if anybody has any.
Sorry, Tony, you caught me by surprise then, ending quite quickly. I think you were testing me, weren't you?
You've gone off for a cup of tea, haven't you?
No, I haven't gone off for a cup of tea. I had one before I joined you. Thanks for that. That's really, really useful. Does anybody have any questions at all for Tony? I mean, you were talking then about, watching what sort of agreements you enter into with companies, Tony. And obviously, it's been a very difficult situation for pretty much every business, and unless you're the owner of Zoom or you face mask. I mean, it's been flippant. I shouldn't be, but there's not many exceptions. Even if you are doing well, that you've got supply chain issues, obviously, with businesses that might be facing difficulties. Where do you stand when it comes to sort of pre-existing arrangements you have with companies that you maybe can't? I mean, I've heard of a few instances where companies can't necessarily deliver what they were delivering before, but they've had agreements with organisations and that they can deliver a semblance of that service. But companies are saying, well, you can't do what you did for me before. I'm not observing, I'm not recognising the contract that we had with you before lockdown. How would you advise on approaching that sort of situation?
Yeah, it's a very interesting point, and it comes back to my point about looking after all the stakeholders in your business, because we have to accept that things have changed and things have gone beyond a lot of people's control, and there has to be, if you've got long-standing customers and suppliers, there has to be an element of trust there as well. I think the big thing is keep communicating with people, keep talking to people, be honest with people as well. I mean, where there are problems in level of service, or you're changing level of service, just be very honest with people about what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve, and listen to what your customers want. I mean, this is a point I was making earlier on. I have come across this with one client recently, where a big focus on one of their particular sales line, and when we really started looking at it, nobody wanted it. Their repeat customers were turning away from it. They weren't bringing new customers onto it, but they kept pushing it and they kept pushing it, and we had quite a sort of strong argument with them about why it's not what people want, so don't sell to people what they don't want.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I mean, obviously for a lot of businesses that they've really analysed. I mean, we've done it as well. Analyse what we used to do and what we can do going forward, and it's a useful opportunity to have a little bit of a spring clean, isn't it? Really, and really assess and drill down into what.
Yeah, it is.
Maybe just. And you've got an excuse to do it as well now. And I think people understand it. Every business is really looking at being a lot leaner, a lot more effective, a lot more efficient in what they do, and hopefully a lot more fit for the future.
That's a really good way to look at it, actually, because it's putting a positive spin on it. And it has given a lot of businesses the opportunity to look at what they're doing. And we all get a bit complacent. We all get a little bit stuck in our comfort zone, and it's all toddling along quite nicely. And we think, this is all tickety-boo. And then something like this comes along and does make you look and think. And there are always positives in there. I mean, from my personal point of view at CRM, some of the positives that have come out for me has been some of the, primarily the way the team have stood up and really been counted, and really, they really have done extremely well. The support that we've had from the team as well has just been superb. But also the way it's developed our relationship with some of our clients, because it's definitely, I think, it's brought us closer into some of our clients with some of the ones that we've been working on, doing some very difficult decision processes with them, but it brings you in closer to the client. It's a positive. And we've had some lovely feedback from clients as well.
Yeah, I mean, we talked to a lot of our clients during this period, and we run a sort of a series called Positive Steps, and talking to all levels of businesses, of staff within businesses, and getting the take from those that have even just joined firms as juniors, and the contact that they're getting with more senior personnel within organisations is much more they're getting much more quality time with those individuals, whereas beforehand everybody was running around. They were difficult to tie down, but we're all much more accessible now than we ever used to be. Our time can be a lot more structured, and we can get a lot more out of those opportunities when we do actually have a time booked in with people, rather than those sort of chance water cooler moments where someone's always trying to get away from that particular conversation. So I think a lot more positives coming out of this than we might understand.
Be interested to know if anybody at CRM considers time they spend with me as quality time, but hey ho, we'll leave that one.
Well, Emma can always chime in, but she probably won't. Will you, Emma? Anyway, well, thank you, Tony. I appreciate that. We haven't got any questions. Obviously, everybody's happy with your talk this morning. We will be converting this into a video, so anybody who wants to watch back, please do so. And I'm sure, Tony, you'll be more than happy for your contact details to be shared with everybody this morning.
Absolutely, yeah, no problem.
Contact with you afterwards. So thank you very much. Yeah, Francisco, thank you for that. Many thanks, useful and interesting. We've got, we haven't got that many webinars coming up now. We've been, as I said, we've been working on what we're doing going forward, but we've got a whole heap of stuff coming to you later on in September and from October onwards. And so we've been busy planning, and we've got our 30th of September is going to be the first of our B41 series coming from Blenheim Palace. So it's an outside broadcast. So kind of Blenheim to host us. And that's going to be on workplace wellbeing. So that's a free to register. As all our events going forward are free to register for members and non-members. So if you want to log into that, go to the B4 website, b4-business.com, and you'll be able to register for that particular event. It'll be a full day of webinars from a range of different speakers. So thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you again to Tony for your fantastic presentation, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Goodbye.